You'll never be anything more than a disappointment. Those were the last words my father threw at me before I walked out of our front door, carrying a single duffel bag and a bus ticket to basic training. My name is Ethan Carter, and growing up, I wasn't the son my parents wanted. My younger brother, Ryan, was their golden child. Every achievement of his was celebrated like a national holiday. Every mistake he made was somehow my fault. While they spent thousands of dollars paying for his business ideas, designer clothes, and luxury lifestyle, I learned early that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it myself. Birthdays passed without presents. Christmas mornings felt empty. Family dinners were nothing more than another opportunity for my father to remind me that I wasn't smart enough, successful enough, or important enough. By the time I turned 18, I realized something painful. I wasn't fighting for their love anymore. I was begging for it. So I stopped. The United States Army became my escape. The morning I enlisted, my mother didn't hug me goodbye. She didn't tell me to stay safe. Instead, she looked at me with complete indifference and said, "Maybe the Army can finally make you useful." My father laughed. "At least someone will pay you to follow orders." Neither of them came to see me off. As the bus pulled away from the station, I watched my hometown disappear through the dusty window. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I had no idea that the battlefield ahead would test every ounce of courage I possessed. I had no idea that years later, the same parents who treated me like I didn't matter would desperately beg for my forgiveness. And I certainly had no idea that one decision made on live national television would change all of our lives forever. The bus rolled through the gates of Fort Jackson just before midnight. Rain hammered against the windows so hard it sounded like machine gun fire. Nobody spoke. 38 strangers sat shoulder to shoulder, gripping their duffel bags like life preservers. Some stared out the windows, others silently prayed. I just kept thinking about one thing. No one was coming to visit me. No one would be writing letters. No one back home was wondering if I was scared. The bus jerked to a stop. The doors hissed open. A thunderous voice exploded into the darkness. "Off the bus! Move! Move! Move!" The drill sergeants swarmed us like wolves. Within seconds, we were standing in the pouring rain, boots sinking into mud while instructors circled us with impossible energy. Every mistake earned another round of shouting. Every hesitation meant push-ups. Every excuse disappeared before it could leave your mouth. For the first week, I wondered if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. We slept barely 4 hours a night. Our mornings started before sunrise. By breakfast, we'd already run miles, carrying packs that felt heavier every single day. Blisters covered my feet. My shoulders were bruised from endless ruck marches. My hands bled from climbing ropes and obstacle courses. Every muscle screamed. But something strange happened. For the first time in my life, nobody cared where I came from. Nobody asked whether my parents loved me. Nobody compared me to my younger brother. In the Army, your last name didn't matter. Only your actions did. That realization changed everything. Every obstacle became another chance to prove myself. Every impossible challenge became another opportunity to grow stronger. Instead of trying to earn someone's approval, I started earning my own respect. One afternoon during a 20-mile ruck march under the blazing summer sun, one of the recruits collapsed beside the trail. Private Daniel Brooks. Heat exhaustion. His breathing was shallow. His vision blurred. Some recruits kept walking. Others froze. Without thinking, I dropped my own pack, grabbed his equipment, threw it over my shoulders, and helped him back onto his feet. Together we finished the march. Hours later, after everyone had finally reached the finish line, our senior drill sergeant walked directly toward me. The entire platoon fell silent. He stopped inches away. His face never changed. "Carter." "Yes, drill sergeant." "You carried another man's weight." "Yes, drill sergeant." "Without being ordered." "Yes, drill sergeant." He stared into my eyes for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded. Exactly once. It wasn't much. But somehow, that tiny nod meant more to me than every compliment I'd spent 18 years chasing back home. From that day forward, people stopped seeing me as the quiet kid. They started seeing me as someone they could trust. Months later, graduation arrived. Families packed the bleachers. Children waved tiny American flags. Parents rushed across the field to hug their sons and daughters. I stood alone beside my duffel bag, watching, smiling for everyone else. No one came for me. Not my father. Not my mother. Not even my brother. As the parking lot slowly emptied, I climbed onto another bus. This one wasn't taking me home. It was taking me to my first duty station. That night my phone buzzed. For one brief second, I actually believed my parents were calling to congratulate me. I answered immediately. Hello? My father's voice came through the speaker. So, you got your first paycheck yet? No congratulations. No pride. No questions about graduation. Just money. He explained Ryan wanted to start an online clothing business. They needed $5,000. Immediately, I looked down at the fresh army patch stitched onto my uniform. I had spent months pushing my body beyond exhaustion. I had earned every dollar honestly. Yet the first thing my family saw was another opportunity to use me. I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and quietly agreed to send the money. Because deep down, I still believed that maybe, just maybe, if I kept sacrificing enough, one day they'd finally call me their son. I had no idea that my greatest test wasn't waiting overseas. It was waiting inside my own family. 3 months later, I received orders that would change my life forever. My unit was deploying to the Middle East. None of us knew exactly what awaited us. We only knew one thing. Some of us would return home. Some of us wouldn't. 3 months after graduating basic training, our aircraft touched down on a military airfield somewhere in the Middle East. The moment the cargo door opened, a wall of scorching heat slammed into us. The desert smelled of dust, diesel fuel, and burnt metal. Even the wind felt hostile. As we unloaded our gear, our platoon sergeant gathered everyone in a tight circle. "Forget everything you saw in the movies," he said. "Out here, there are no heroes looking for glory. Your only job is to make sure the soldier next to you goes home alive." Those words became our way of life. Days blended into weeks. Weeks disappeared into months. Every sunrise started with patrol briefings. Every sunset ended with weapon maintenance. Sleep came in short, restless bursts, always interrupted by alarms, distant explosions, or radio traffic crackling through the darkness. The battlefield had a way of stripping away everything unnecessary. It didn't care where you grew up. It didn't care how much money your family had. Out there, courage wasn't measured by speeches. It was measured by the decisions you made in the worst moments of your life. I found purpose. Not because I loved war. No one who has truly seen combat ever loves it. I found purpose because every mission meant protecting the men beside me. Corporal Marcus Hill became like an older brother. Private Luis Moreno could make an entire convoy laugh, even after 16 hours on the road. Sergeant Daniel Ross never raised his voice, but everyone listened the moment he spoke. These weren't just teammates. They were family. The kind of family I'd spent my whole life searching for. Then came the phone calls from home. Whenever our satellite connection finally worked, I hoped just once that my parents would ask how I was doing. Instead, every conversation sounded exactly the same. "Ethan, we need another transfer. Ryan's business is growing. Investing in him benefits the whole family." One evening, I stood outside the communications tent, still wearing 40 pounds of body armor after a 12-hour patrol. My phone connected. Before I could say hello, my mother spoke. "Did you send the money?" I blinked. "I almost got hit by a roadside bomb today." Silence. Then she sighed impatiently. "That's not what I asked." My grip tightened around the phone. "I've been out here for months." "I know. I haven't heard anyone ask if I'm okay." She laughed softly. "You're in the Army, Ethan. Danger is your job." Then she added something I'll never forget. "Ryan has a future to build. You're already getting paid to be over there." The line went quiet. For a long moment I stared across the desert as the sun disappeared beyond the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, another convoy rolled past, kicking clouds of sand into the evening sky. I realized something painful. To my parents, my life had become nothing more than a paycheck. Still, I sent the money. Every month, thousands of dollars disappeared from my account. Ryan posted photos online wearing expensive watches, luxury sneakers, designer jackets. He called himself a self-made entrepreneur. People flooded his comments with admiration. Not one of them knew his entire lifestyle was funded by the brother he barely acknowledged. Meanwhile, my own possessions fit inside a single military footlocker. One pair of boots. One rifle. One sleeping bag. One photograph of the platoon taped inside my locker. That was enough. Because unlike the life Ryan pretended to live, mine had meaning. Then everything changed. It happened during a routine convoy escort. The morning started quietly. Too quietly. The roads were empty. The villages seemed abandoned. Even Sergeant Ross looked uneasy. "Stay sharp," he warned over the radio. "Something doesn't feel right." 10 minutes later, the world exploded. A deafening blast lifted the lead vehicle off the ground. The armored truck flipped sideways, crashing into a cloud of fire and dust. Before anyone could react, automatic gunfire erupted from both sides of the road. Bullets tore through the air. Glass shattered. The radio filled with desperate voices. Contact left. Man down. Medic. My heart pounded against my body armor. Training took over. Fear disappeared. Only instinct remained. Smoke covered everything. I sprinted toward the disabled vehicle while rounds struck the pavement around me. Inside, 2 soldiers were trapped. One wasn't moving. The other was screaming in pain. I grabbed the damaged door with both hands. It wouldn't budge. Another explosion rocked the convoy. Shrapnel sprayed across the road. Ignoring the chaos around me, I wedged my shoulder against the twisted metal and pushed with everything I had. The hinges finally gave way. I reached inside. "Come on." The wounded soldier grabbed my arm. Together we pulled him free just seconds before flames consumed the cab. There wasn't time to celebrate. The firefight had only begun. And before the sun set that day, every decision I made would determine who lived and who never made it home. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not complete silence. The kind that exists for a fraction of a second after an explosion, when your ears are ringing so violently that the entire world seems to stop breathing. Then the noise came rushing back. Gunfire. Explosions. Men shouting over the radio. Someone screaming for a medic. The convoy had driven straight into a carefully planned ambush. The lead vehicle burned fiercely, sending thick black smoke hundreds of feet into the sky. Enemy fighters hidden among the rocky hills unleashed a relentless storm of bullets. The road had become a killing zone. Training took over before fear had a chance. "Cover the right flank," Sergeant Ross shouted. Our machine gunner returned fire while the rest of us scrambled behind the damaged vehicles. Dust filled the air. Every breath tasted like sand and burning fuel. I checked my rifle. 1 magazine. Another in my vest. Tourniquet. Medical kit. Radio. Everything exactly where it belonged. Then I heard it. A voice. Weak. Barely audible. "Help." I looked toward the burning transport truck. Private Lewis Grant. Only 19 years old. His legs were traps beneath twisted steel. Flames were spreading toward the fuel tank. If someone didn't reach him within seconds, nobody would. "I've got him," I shouted. "Carter, don't," Sergeant Ross yelled. "It's a death trap." Maybe he was right, but I couldn't leave him there. I sprinted. Bullets slammed into the pavement around me. Chunks of concrete exploded beside my boots. Every instinct screamed for me to turn back. Instead, I ran faster. Heat from the burning vehicle hit me like an open furnace. I dropped beside Lewis. His face was pale. Blood covered his uniform. "My legs," he whispered. "They're stuck." I grabbed the crushed metal frame and pulled. Nothing. Another burst of enemy fire ripped overhead. A round struck the truck just inches above us. The fuel hissed. Time was running out. I planted both boots against the wreckage, wrapped my hands around the twisted door, and pulled with everything I had. My shoulders burned. My back screamed. The steel groaned. Then, crack. The frame finally shifted. Lewis cried out as I dragged him free. The moment we cleared the truck, a deafening explosion tore through the convoy. The entire vehicle erupted into a towering fireball. The blast threw both of us across the road. My helmet slammed against the asphalt. For several seconds, I couldn't hear anything. only a high-pitched ringing. I rolled over. Every muscle hurt, but I was alive. Lewis was alive. There wasn't time to recover. More soldiers were down. Corporal Marcus Hill had been hit while protecting another squad. Without thinking, I crawled toward him through a storm of gunfire. Blood poured from his shoulder. I ripped open my medical kit, applied pressure, packed the wound, secured a tourniquet. Marcus grabbed my vest. "Leave me," he gasped. I shook my head. Not happening. Using every ounce of strength I had left, I lifted him onto my shoulders and carried him behind the armored vehicle. By now the firefight had lasted nearly 40 minutes. Air support finally arrived. The roar of fighter jets echoed across the valley. Moments later, friendly helicopters swept overhead. Enemy positions disappeared beneath precise strikes. The shooting slowly faded. Then, everything became quiet. Smoke drifted across the ruined highway. The smell of burnt rubber and diesel filled the air. Medics moved from soldier to soldier. Some survivors cried openly. Others simply stared into the distance. Sergeant Ross walked toward me. His uniform was torn, his face streaked with dust and blood. He stopped in front of me. For several seconds, he said nothing. Finally, he removed his gloves, extended his hand. "I've served 26 years, he said quietly. "I've never seen courage like that." I didn't know what to say. I looked around. 3 helicopters landed nearby. The wounded were loaded aboard. Lewis looked at me from inside one of them. Despite the oxygen mask covering his face, he managed to raise a trembling thumbs up. That image stayed with me. Weeks later, after the operation ended, I was called into the command headquarters. The room was unusually formal. Several senior officers stood waiting. A colonel placed a classified folder on the table. "Carter," he began. "The board has completed its review." He paused, then smiled. "Your actions saved multiple American lives." I swallowed. "You have been recommended for one of the nation's highest military decorations." The room suddenly felt very small. I hadn't thought about medals. I hadn't thought about recognition. I'd only thought about getting everyone home. The colonel closed the folder. "There will be a formal ceremony in Washington after your deployment." As I walked back toward my barracks that evening, the desert sky glowed orange beneath the setting sun. For the first time in years, I wondered whether my parents would finally be proud of me, whether my father might shake my hand, whether my mother might tell someone, "That's my son." I didn't know it then, but the greatest disappointment of my life was still waiting for me back home. The flight home was quieter than I imagined. Most of the soldiers on board slept with their heads against the windows, exhausted after months overseas. Others stared into the clouds, each lost in memories they couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been there. I sat alone. The Silver Star recommendation still echoed in my mind. Not because of the medal, but because of what it represented. Every face that made it home. Every heartbeat that hadn't been silenced in the desert. Every promise we had made to each other before stepping into combat. When the aircraft finally landed at Joint Base Andrews, I took a deep breath. For the first time in over a year, I was home. A week later, I received the official letter. The envelope was thick, sealed with the emblem of the Department of Defense. Inside was an invitation to the National Awards ceremony in Washington, D.C. I would officially receive the Silver Star before senior military leaders, members of Congress, and national media. The invitation included 2 reserved VIP seats. For immediate family. I stared at those words for a long time. Maybe, just maybe, this was the moment everything changed. Maybe my parents had finally realized what military service really cost. Maybe my father would finally look at me with pride instead of disappointment. Maybe my mother would hug me instead of asking for money. It was a foolish hope. But hope has a way of surviving long after common sense disappears. The next afternoon, I drove to my childhood home. Nothing had changed. The same perfectly trimmed lawn. The same expensive SUV parked in the driveway. The same house I'd spent 18 years trying to earn a place in. I knocked once before walking inside. My mother barely looked up from her phone. My father was sitting in his favorite recliner, watching financial news on television. Ryan lounged across the couch, wearing a designer tracksuit and scrolling through social media. No one stood to greet me. No one asked about my deployment. No one noticed the scars running across my hands. I brought something, I said quietly. I placed the gold-trimmed envelope on the coffee table. My father opened it without saying a word. His eyes scanned the page. Silver star. He leaned back. Ahem. That was it. Just. Ahem. My mother finally looked over. So this is some kind of military award. I nodded. It's one of the nation's highest decorations for valor. She shrugged. That's nice. Ryan chuckled. So, do you at least get prize money? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's not about money. He laughed again. Everything's about money. Silence settled over the room. Finally, I slid the 2 VIP tickets across the table. I'd like both of you to come. It's important to me. Neither of them answered immediately. Instead, my mother opened the calendar on her phone. Her expression changed. Oh. She frowned. That's the same Friday as Ryan's launch party. Ryan smiled proudly. My clothing brand is officially partnering with a luxury retailer. We rented the ballroom at the Grand Meridian Hotel. There'll be influencers, local celebrities, photographers. My father nodded approvingly. It'll be a huge networking opportunity. I looked from one face to another. You can celebrate afterward. The ceremony only lasts a couple of hours. My father folded the invitation closed. You don't understand. This launch could change Ryan's future. I felt my chest tighten. So could this. He shook his head. Your military ceremony is formal. Ryan's event is business. My mother crossed her arms. We've already confirmed our attendance. I can't cancel on people now. I stared at them. After everything. After the deployments. After the firefights. After the men who never made it home. This was their decision. A party. Over their own son. Ryan leaned forward with a grin. Besides, it's just another medal. You already know you're getting it. My event only happens once. I looked down at the invitation in my hands. The paper suddenly felt heavier than body armor. No anger. No shouting. Just disappointment so deep it became numb. I slowly stood. I understand. My mother smiled, relieved that I wasn't arguing. I knew you'd be reasonable. She reached into her purse. Oh, before you go. Our credit cards have been tight lately. Could you help cover a few expenses for Ryan's event? I stared at her. For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. She actually expected me to help pay for the celebration they had chosen over my military award ceremony. Something inside me finally broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Completely. I picked up the invitation. Folded it carefully. Slipped it back into the envelope. I won't be paying for anything. The smile disappeared from my mother's face. What? I said no. My father's expression hardened. Watch your tone. I met his eyes. For the first time in my life. I didn't look away. I spent years believing if I sacrificed enough, you'd finally see me. I was wrong. Ryan rolled his eyes. You're being dramatic. I ignored him. I don't need your approval anymore. I turned toward the front door. Behind me, my father raised his voice. If you walk out now, don't expect us to come crawling back later. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, I answered calmly. I won't. Then I walked out. The evening air felt strangely peaceful. For the first time since I was a little boy, I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to earn my family's love. As I drove away, the 2 unused VIP tickets rested on the passenger seat. One of them would never belong to my parents. Not anymore. I just didn't know who truly deserved that seat. But deep down, I had a feeling the answer had been beside me all along. The Pentagon looked different than I had imagined. Massive, silent, almost sacred. As I walked through its marble corridors wearing my dress uniform, every polished floor reflected the medals, ribbons, and names of those who had sacrificed everything for the country. This wasn't just another ceremony. It was a place where courage was remembered. I arrived 3 hours early. Habit. In the Army, being on time meant arriving before everyone else. I checked in, received my seating assignment, and looked toward the front row. 2 VIP seats, reserved in my name. One carried my identification. The other still sat empty. I stood there for nearly a minute staring at it. That chair represented 18 years of hope, 18 years of trying to earn my parents' approval. Now, it represented something else. A choice. Mind if I sit here? The familiar voice pulled me from my thought. I turned around. Sergeant Daniel Ross stood behind me, wearing his formal dress blues. The scar on his cheek had healed, but it still reminded both of us of that day in the desert. "You look nervous," he said with a small smile. "I've been shot at. I've jumped from helicopters. I've walked into buildings not knowing who was waiting inside." I looked back at the empty chair. "But this feels harder." Ross followed my eyes. "They're really not coming." I shook my head. "No," he sighed. "The people who should have been here don't deserve that seat anyway." His words stayed with me. An hour later, while the auditorium slowly filled with military families, reporters, and distinguished guests, I walked outside to get some fresh air. That's when I saw him. Mr. Harold Bennett. He was standing near the memorial garden, wearing a faded maintenance uniform. A broom rested against the wall beside him. For a second, I didn't recognize him. Then he smiled. "Ethan?" I smiled back immediately. "Mr. Bennett." 20 years earlier, when I was just a lonely 12-year-old boy, Harold Bennett had been the janitor at my middle school. Whenever I stayed late because I didn't want to go home, he always noticed. He'd hand me a bottle of water, sometimes a sandwich. He never asked why I looked so sad. He simply sat beside me and talked. He taught me how to fix broken bicycles, how to shake someone's hand properly, how to keep my word. When nobody believed in me, he did. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He chuckled. "My son works security for today's ceremony. I figured I'd come support him." Support. Such a simple word. Yet somehow, it carried more weight than every promise my parents had ever made. Without thinking, I reached into my jacket pocket. I pulled out the second VIP pass. "I'd be honored if you'd sit with me." Harold froze. His weathered hands trembled slightly. "Me." I nodded. "You've shown up for me more times than anyone else." His eyes filled with tears. "I don't own a suit. You don't need one. You just need to be here." Half an hour later, military staff found a formal blazer that fit him well enough for the occasion. When he walked into the auditorium beside me, he looked uncomfortable. Not because he felt unworthy, but because he had never expected to be treated like an honored guest. As we reached the front row, cameras flashed. People assumed he was family. In a way, he was. More than the people who shared my last name. The ceremony began exactly at 7 o'clock. The military band played the national anthem. Every soldier stood at attention. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we recognize extraordinary courage." One by one, names were called. Stories of sacrifice echoed through the hall. Then, Ethan Carter. The room fell silent. A large screen behind the stage displayed photographs from the deployment. The destroyed convoy. The rescue operation. The helicopter evacuation. The narrator described every moment. How one soldier had ignored direct danger. How he had rescued wounded comrades under relentless enemy fire. How his actions saved lives. I listened quietly, not because I enjoyed hearing my own story, but because every sentence reminded me of the men who couldn't be there to hear theirs. Please welcome Specialist Ethan Carter. Applause thundered through the auditorium. I marched toward the stage. Every step echoed through the hall. The commanding general stood waiting. He looked directly into my eyes. Specialist Carter, on behalf of a grateful nation, thank you. He pinned the silver star to my uniform. The medal felt surprisingly light. Its meaning was immeasurable. The audience rose to its feet. A standing ovation. As I turned toward the crowd, my eyes searched only for one face. Harold Bennett. He wasn't clapping the loudest. He wasn't shouting. He simply stood there, tears running down his cheeks, pride shining in his eyes. It was the look I had spent my entire childhood searching for. Not admiration, not applause, just genuine pride. In that single moment, I realized something that changed my life forever. Family isn't always the people who raise you. Sometimes, it's the people who quietly refuse to let you give up. The applause slowly faded. I believed the ceremony was over. I was wrong. The commanding general stepped back to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude today's ceremony, there is one final announcement. The room became completely silent. The general looked directly toward the front row, toward Harold. Then he smiled. Today we also recognize those whose quiet acts of kindness shaped the lives of America's heroes. Harold looked confused. So did I. The general lifted a sealed envelope from the podium. Mr. Harold Bennett, would you please join us on stage? Harold looked at me in disbelief. I think they're talking to you, I whispered. He slowly stood. The cameras immediately turned toward him. Thousands of eyes followed every step he took. Neither of us knew what was about to happen. But somehow, I knew this day wasn't finished changing our lives. Harold Bennett froze in the aisle. He looked over his shoulder, certain the general must have been calling someone else. The commanding general smiled. Yes, sir. You. The audience broke into warm applause as Harold slowly climbed the steps to the stage. He looked completely out of place in the borrowed navy blazer. His hands trembled. His eyes searched the room until they found mine. I smiled and gave him a small nod. You belong up there, I whispered. He took a deep breath and continued walking. The general shook his hand firmly. For more than 30 years, he began, Mr. Harold Bennett has quietly served his community. He has mentored countless young people. He has volunteered in schools. He has never sought recognition. But today, we recognize him. Another officer stepped forward carrying a polished wooden case. Inside was a beautifully engraved plaque. The audience applauded again. Then the general continued. Mr. Bennett, your kindness helped shape the character of one of America's bravest soldiers. The courage specialist Ethan Carter displayed on the battlefield began long before he put on a uniform. It began with ordinary people who chose compassion. Harold lowered his head. Tears rolled freely down his face. I didn't do anything special, he whispered into the microphone. The general smiled. Sometimes the smallest acts change the biggest lives. The auditorium erupted into a standing ovation. I felt my own eyes burn. Not because of the applause. Because every word was true. Harold never gave me money. He never promised to solve my problems. He simply treated me like I mattered. That changed everything. Hundreds of miles away, inside the Grand Meridian Hotel, my parents watched the ceremony unfold on a giant television suspended above the ballroom. The music had stopped. Conversations faded. Guests turned toward the screen. Ryan stood motionless. My mother covered her mouth. My father stared in disbelief. The camera focused on me, then on Harold. The announcer described how an old-school janitor had become the guest of honor because he believed in a lonely boy when almost nobody else did. Several guests looked toward my family. Whispers spread across the ballroom. Weren't they supposed to be there? I thought they were his parents. They missed this? Ryan's smile disappeared. For the first time in years. No one wanted a photograph with him. No one cared about his clothing brand. The only story anyone wanted to discuss was the soldier whose family hadn't shown up. 3 days later, I returned to Fort Liberty. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. morning physical training, leadership classes, helping younger soldiers prepare for deployment. One afternoon my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered, "Ethan." It was my mother. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "We saw the ceremony." I waited. No words came. Finally, she whispered, "We're sorry." For years, I had imagined hearing those words. I thought they would heal something inside me. Instead, I felt peaceful, not angry, not happy, simply calm. "I'm glad you called," I said. There was hope in her voice. "So, can we start over?" I looked across the training field. Young recruits were helping each other carry heavy equipment across the obstacle course. Nobody complained. Nobody kept score. They simply looked after one another. I smiled. "I truly hope you both find happiness. But some bridges can't be rebuilt." Silence. "I don't hate you. I've just learned the difference between relatives and family." Before she could answer, I ended the call. Not out of revenge. Out of closure. Months passed. Harold and I stayed close. Every Sunday afternoon I visited his small house. We'd drink coffee on the porch. Talk about life. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. The silence was comfortable. The kind shared between people who don't have to prove anything. One autumn morning, I drove him to the dedication of a new youth mentorship center. The city had named it after him, the Harold Bennett Community Leadership Center. As children filled the building, Harold quietly looked at me. "You know," he said, "I used to worry you were always alone." I smiled. "I was. For a while." He nodded. "Not anymore." He was right. The Army had given me brothers. Good leaders had given me purpose. One quiet janitor had given me hope. And I had finally given myself something I spent my entire childhood searching for: self-respect. A year later, I stood before a new class of recruits on their first day of training. They looked exactly as I once had: nervous, uncertain, trying to hide their fear. I walked slowly across the room. Then I stopped. "When you leave here," I told them, "people will notice your uniform. They'll notice your medals. They'll notice your rank. But none of those things define who you are. What defines you is how you treat people when nobody's watching." The room remained perfectly silent. I thought about my parents. I thought about Harold. I thought about every soldier who had trusted me in the worst moments of their lives. Then I smiled. Because real strength isn't measured by what you earn. It's measured by what you give. That evening, I visited the military cemetery where several members of my old unit rested. The wind moved quietly through rows of white headstones. I placed a small American flag beside each grave. Then I stood at attention for a long time. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the horizon, I realized something. The boy who once believed he wasn't enough was gone. In his place stood a man who no longer needed anyone's permission to know his worth. I gave one final salute, turned, and walked toward the future. Not with the family I was born into, but with the family I had chosen. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough.